If each of these he would die from spear thrust, bear's teeth, and wash of blood, if those were longer, it would actually be harder to picture them because you're trying to keep the whole thing in your head at once. And so by the end of these three, you can keep track of all three of them. But if this paragraph, instead of being like this long, if it was like this long, Maria would enjoy it more. Heyo. Sorry guys, I'm such a menace without the girls here. Like I said, Katie could not make it today, so we're going to be trying to do another stream later in the month with her. But for today, I'm already all dressed up and handsome. Ruggedly so, of course. I figured, though, since I don't have to worry about the girls and them getting drunk and possibly dying of alcohol poisoning, I thought I would do A Song of Ice and Fire today. Not the whole series, because that's very long, but we are going to be doing the prologue to A Dance of Dragons, which is the 5th book. And I always really liked it. Martin is really good. He's really good at like atmosphere and horror and kind of short stories in general. That's actually really his strength. And I feel like his prose got better as the series went on, even as the series quality as a whole kind of, I guess there's spoilers, but also this is like a 30-year-old series and they had a TV show about it that's also like 10 years old at this point. So I think you guys can handle it. So this is the prologue to the 5th book. Basically what's happened and what you need to know, if you haven't are aware of the series, there's like the normal medieval kingdoms, and then there's a wall, and then there's a bunch of like, why they call them wildlings or the free folk, who are basically like amalgamation of Scottish and Northern European and just vaguely barbarian Norse kind of people. This takes place after a big battle where the wildlings tried to get past the wall and they kind of failed miserably. And so this is told from the viewpoint of a character who can warg into, which basically means like telepathically control or inhabit wolves and other animals. And this is told from the viewpoint of that character called Varamyr, who also is like not a good dude. He was like a villain in the last book. And so this is kind of a cool thing because he was like a minor villain. This is from his viewpoint, and this is the prologue to the book. And one of the things I want to kind of watch out for, or at least pay attention to, is how Martin distributes information or disseminates information throughout the chapter, because there is a lot of information to go through. And there's actually very little action, I think, in the chapter. It's mostly him remembering things, but I think it works pretty well, and he tells it in an interesting way. You guys can tell me what you think as we go through it. Oh, also, another thing is that when I copy and paste this, the italices didn't come through with it, so we're just going to have to live with that. The night was rank with the smell of man. This is a really good opening line. And yes, this is going to be one of those critique streams of ours where we talk about every minor like verb and description and simile. Yes, no, I entirely agree, Penny. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. I'm not going to lie. But I didn't shave this morning, so we got the extra rugged. Oh, you guys can't see because she's covering it. We got the extra rugged like 9 o'clock shadow. By 9 o'clock, I mean 9 o'clock in the morning shadow. So this is not going to be good. I tend to like say weird things when I'm talking to myself. So we'll see how this goes. Again, I really like this first line. Rank is just a really good. Katie's not here, so I don't know what kind of word it is. It's not a verb, but it's just a very good descriptive word. We've talked before about how you want to use really strong. He could have written this sentence as the night spelled of man. That's actually a perfectly good way of starting this. Like, I think that would still be, there's a short sentence, it gives you an impact, but rank gives you an idea of what the wolf thinks of it, and that's actually, I think, a really cool little thing. The warg stopped beneath the tree and sniffed, his gray-brown fur dappled by shadow. A sigh of piney wind brought the man set to him, ever fainter smells that spoke of fox and hare, seal and stag, even wolf. Those were man spells too, the warg knew. The stink of old skins, dead and sour, near drowned beneath stronger scents of smoke and blood and rot. Only man stripped the skins from other beasts and wore their hides and hair. What we're doing here is he's trying to get us into the viewpoint of a wolf. Penny says that rank is an adjective. You're going to have to be my Katie, so just get unhinged and drink a lot. Wargs have no fear of man as wolves do. Hate and hunger coiled in his belly, and he gave a low growl, calling to his one-eyed brother, to his sly sister. As he raced through the trees, his packmates followed hard on his heels. They had caught the scent as well. As he ran, he saw through their eyes too, and glimpsed himself ahead. The breath of the pack puffed warm and white from long gray jaws. Ice had frozen between their paws, hard as stone, but the hunt was on now, the prey ahead. Flesh, the warg thought, meat. And I think these are supposed to be italicized, but they just weren't. Okay, so one-eyed brother and his sly sister. These are, it's not super important who these wolves are, but just a little specificity there really helps paint the scene and give you a sense that this is a real world. And it's also, something a wolf would think. It's not like his talkative brother or something like that. And these may seem like small things, but the amount of times I've seen writers just not put in little details like that where it's needed is a lot. Like if you think of writing as, or your scene as like a room, this gives you more of a sense that there are walls to the room and there are things within the room. I guess like furniture would be a better way of describing it. It's not crazy, but it's good, like sly sister. As he ran, he saw through their eyes too and glimpsed himself ahead. This is possibly a little weird, but the Varamyr, the guy, is seeing through all of their eyes at once, and so this is kind of showing that and getting that idea out there. This is a nice description, I think. The breath of the pack puffed warm and white from long gray jaws. It took me a second to figure out what the hell he was talking about here. The breath of the pack puffed warm and white from long gray jaws. So this is, and I don't know what this is, but basically this is speaking of it in like the abstract, like all long gray jaws, or like they just saw it. I would have phrased this: the breath of the pack puffed warm and white from their long gray jaws. To me, it's a little bit clearer that way, and that's not super important. So what happened here is I read it, and then I had to go back and be like, wait, what? Are they talking about, like, is this a simile for like what the trees look like or the wind looks like? And then I was like, oh, okay, that's what he's doing. He's talking about the pack as a whole. One could make the argument that he's trying to identify the pack as one unit by talking about them breathing as a whole, but I think this is just a clearer way of doing it. Penny says, I told my husband not to interrupt me listening to the ruggedly handsome Will, and he's just blinked at me and said, enjoy yourself. Look, man, that's what's up. This is a solo one. We don't have Maria and Katie to dilute the handsomeness. Ice had frozen beneath their paws, hard as stone, but the hunt was on now, the prey ahead. So hard as stone, this is not very creative in terms of like, this is a very stone is hard, whatever. But it is a nice detail that only a wolf would really think about. We don't have paws. And so it's actually quite good at getting you into their mindset. But the hunt was on, their prey ahead. Flesh, the Warg thought. Yeah, and this is like how a wolf would think, is like you get an idea of the energy of it. A man alone was a feeble thing, big and strong with good sharp eyes, but dull of ear and deaf to smells. Deer and elk and even hares were faster, bears and boars fiercer in a fight, but men in packs were dangerous. As the wolves closed on the prey, the Warg heard the wailing of a pup, the crust of last night's snow breaking under clumsy man paws, the rattle of hard skins on the long gray claws men carried. Swords, a voice at him whispered, spears. Okay, so this is nice what it's doing here. Wailing of a pup, clumsy man paws, rattle of hard skins, long gray claws. What's nice here is we know exactly what he's talking about because we're not wolves, or most of us aren't. I am a Sigma, as you guys know. Sigma male. And so we automatically know what he's talking about, but we get it from the perspective of the wolf. And then what we get here is swords, a voice in him whispered, spears. And so what we're getting is, oh, okay, there's someone inside of here. And then this is another thing. We just had a bunch of medium-sized sentences, and then we have one for emphasis. This seems very basic, but this is, again, a thing I don't see a lot is people don't quite know how to alternate sentence length like that and what should be like a wham line is what I call them and what don't. Saga says, Will is the alpha of Sigmas. This is true. This is true. I actually am a Sigma, though, because I just don't like other people. So again, we're getting the idea that there's something looking through this wolf. And it's also just like a little like mysterious, and there's a tension there. And you almost always want some kind of a tension in your scene underlying it. The trees had grown icy teeth snarling down from the bare brown branches. So icy teeth is for stalagmites, or not stalagmites, just for, I don't remember what those are called. That's, again, not a super fancy simile. It's not like the boy's head wrinkled like a walnut from like She Who Became the Sun, or they butchered the trees. But it's still a solid one. Snarling down, also very good. That is, what did Penny say that was? Adjective. That's a nice, strong adjective, snarling. And it gives you a very clear sense of it. Icicles, melody coming in clutch. Snarling is not an adjective. All right, I blame Penny. I don't know. I never learned grammar. One eye ripped through the undergrowth, sprang snow. His packmates followed up and down the slope beyond until the wood opened between them and the men were there. One was a female. The fur-wrapped bundle she clutched was her pup. Leave her for last, the voice whispered. The males are the danger. They were roaring at each other as men did, but the Warg could smell their terror. I actually think that's funny, roaring at each other as men did, in terms of like, yeah, that is a weird idea if you're an animal of why are you talking to each other? Like, that's odd. One had a wooden tooth that's tall as he was. He flung it, but his hands were shaking and the tooth sailed high. Then the pack was on him. His one-eyed brother knocked the tooth thrower back into his... Is it a verb? Again, Katie's not here. I don't know. His one-eyed brother knocked the tooth thrower back into a snowdrift and tore his throat out as he struggled. His sister slipped behind the other male and took him from the rear, but left the female and the pup for him. Slipped is a good whatever that is. I'm going to say adjective. She had a toothed toe, a little one made of bone, but she dropped it when the Warg's jaws closed around her leg. This is a nice, I don't know what it's called, but Martin does it a lot. And it's something I see not a lot. So it's a description and then like an action of the thing that describes it. This is a nice way of describing what can be going on because it gives you like a picture and then the picture moves in terms of how you think of it in your head. Nope, another verb. Okay, melody. Okay, all right. Okay, I'm kidding. Thank you. As she fell, she wrapped both arms around her noisy pup. Underneath her furs, the female was just skin and bones, but her dugs were full of milk. Just never talk about nipples. The sweetest meat was on the pup. The wolf saved the choicest parts for his brothers. All around the carcasses, the frozen snow turned pink and red as the pack filled its bellies. Okay, so he ate the baby, but it's not super... I mean, I guess it's gross. But he ate the baby, but like it's described in a way that is both creepy but also tactful. Isn't like he saw his small chubby arm and ripped it off. Like, you know what I mean? Like that could be very gross. It's not. It's done in a way that's kind of creepy because he's pulling out of the scene and abstracting it a little bit, which, you know, I've often said don't abstract, but it actually works in cases where you're trying to describe something that the character might be disassociating from, because that's what happens when you disassociate. Another example of this I remember is in the Kushiel books. 3 of the main characters who I really liked died in a way that was like the main character just described them dying, very kind of like, and then they were killed by whoever. It was a little bit better than that. And I remember being so pissed off in that scene, so it can be very effective. The other thing about it is that it is just information, so you can infer what happened without being told what had happened. That is sometimes a smart thing to do. This is something that, having read ChatGPT, whatever, is not something I think the computer can do, because what's happening here is that there is actually no connection grammatically or action-wise between these two. It's as she fell, she wrapped both arms around her noisy puppy. This is, you're just inferring from the information he's being, ChatGPT, all right, thanks, great melody. You're just inferring from the information that he's valuing that what happened. And like, okay, the only way he would know that the meat is sweet is if he ate it. Which again, I think is the thing a computer can't do at this point, really. And it's a nice way of getting information across. Also, all around the carcasses, the frozen snow turned pink and red as the pack filled its bellies. That's just a very good image. Again, it's kind of a farther back, a little bit, not abstracted, because it has specific imagery. I don't know what's going on, guys, today. I'm sorry. But it is pulled back, leagues away. This is awful because it should be miles. Because we're Americans, goddammit. We use freedom units, not imperial units. In a one-room hut of mud and straw with a thatched roof and a smoke hole and a floor-packed earth, Varamyr shivered and coughed and licked his lips. Okay, so what we have here is, I like this, one-room hut of mud and straw. It could feel like info dumping, but because it's relatively swift, it gives you an immediate idea of the environment and also like the culture and all it's details, and you want details. And in this case, with the thatched roof and a smoke hole and a floor of hard-packed earth, it's details, it's good, and it's short enough. If this was like 3 paragraphs, like that one thing in She Who Became the Sun, where she talks about the Mongolian Empire for a full paragraph before getting to the next point, it would not be enough. These are easy to grasp, and they're very short. Melody says, but would it fit better to use leagues? Yeah, I mean, it does. I'm kidding. Leagues is fine. I would use miles because, again, I just don't. I'm American. But leagues is fine if you're going for like an old-timey kind. It's that thing where like all ancient civilizations are British. So Romans, not played by Italians, played by the British. You know, Greeks in Troy, not played by Greeks, played by the British. So leagues is appropriate because it just doesn't ping. Varamyr shivered and coughed and licked his lips. Okay, very good. Adjective? No, verbs? Yes, we will say verbs. Melody, help me out. Very specific, gives you a very clear image. It's along the same lines as all the stories that use coin. Yes, I don't know if you, since you're new, I don't know if you're there, but I complained in the Discord once about how coins is, or I think I did this maybe in the Savior's Champion video, but like coins is one of my irritation spots because it's so vague. It's like you never would be like, hey mom, can you give me some coins for the slot machine or the parking machine? And you'd be like, no. It would be like nickels, dimes, quarters, or even change, which is specific, I guess, American slang. His eyes were red, his lips cracked, his throat dry and parched, but the taste of blood and fat filled his mouth even as his swollen body cried for nourishment. Okay, so very good descriptions here. And he does a thing, and I think I picked this up from him, but it's you go ba 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 ba, description, but, and then you say, I mean, he's not the one who came up with this. I'm just describing a thing he does. Martin does a lot. Even as his swollen belly cried for nourishment. Okay, another good thing here, specifics, blood and fat, instead of just like meat. Taste here is actually also important. Normally I would say that's filtering, but if we get rid of it, but blood and fat filled his mouth, that would actually be kind of confusing because it isn't actually filling his mouth. It's from far away. So we need the fact that it's a filtering word there. Mother, I require currency. Yeah, exactly. Like it's just a weird, that's how they talk. That's how people in books talk. Oh, okay. The other idea here is that he's contrasting two ideas. So again, we're getting the idea he was in somebody else's head, but it didn't actually fill him up. So again, we're explaining the concept without explaining the concept. Notice at no point here has he said, and I took the mind of the wolf, or I was inhabiting the wolf, or he was inhabiting the wolf. It's being inferred. And again, that's a thing you kind of want to do because it makes your readers feel smart. And it doesn't feel like telling or being obvious or clunky. Saga, the storyteller, says, blood and fat gives a very specific idea and it helps us as readers imagine it better. We don't know what people taste like, hopefully, but we've eaten bloody steak or fat on a pork chop. Actually, that's true. You could even have done something like a little bit, like an adjective, like, I don't know, like mushy fat. I'm vegetarian, so I've never actually had fat, but something like that. But yeah, you're right. It ties it in and gives a specific idea to you. Meat eaters. A child's flesh, he thought, remembering bump. Human meat. Had he sunk so low as to hunger after human meat, he could almost hear Haggan growling at him. Men may eat the flesh of beasts, and beasts the flesh of men, but the man who eats the flesh of man is an abomination. He could almost hear Haggan growling at him. So this is an interesting way of introducing it, but it works this way because partly Varamyr is like kind of dying of cold exposure, and so this is his thoughts kind of wandering. But also what Martin did here is he set up an idea, the eating meat, and then he has an associated idea. And that's how people actually think all the time. It's funny because sometimes you can say a thing to a person, and then, I don't know, like the two of you are doing something else, and then they'll say something that you were thinking like 5 minutes later because both of you like started on the same track and went in the same direction. Like people are actually kind of predictable in how they think. There's a book I read about a shapeshifter who has to be careful not to get stuck because they stop thinking like a human. I always thought that was great. Yeah, that's going to come up here, and I really like it. And so we get cultural details here. Men may eat the flesh of beasts, and beasts the flesh of men, but the man who eats an abomination. Abomination, that had always been Haggan's favorite word. Abomination, abomination. To eat of human meat was abomination. To mate as a wolf with wolf was abomination. To seize the body of another man was the worst abomination of all. So we get that there's a cultural context here in terms of you can control, inhabit the animal, but there are still rules there. And that is actually going to become important in this chapter because we get a sense for the fact that Varamyr is not a good person because he's violating these rules, even though the rules to an extent are kind of like arbitrary and that like why can't you just be in an animal doing these things? I don't know. I don't want to get too into the social justice of wargs, but basically it's setting up a cultural values, and he's going to break it later, which was important. Haggan was weak, afraid of his own power. He died weeping and alone when I ripped his second life from him. Varamyr had devoured his heart himself. He taught me much and more, and the last thing I learned from him was the taste of human flesh. So that's what I'm talking about. Varamyr, not a great guy, but we have a justification. Haggan was weak, afraid of his own power, and we're going to get an idea of, Haggan was the normal and Varamyr is the description. So this is another thing. Martin's characters talk to themselves a lot, and I actually really like that. That always helps me really fall into a character. It's something I've noticed because in my head, I'm always thinking constantly in a monologue. And so when characters do that, that helps me fall in. And also Martin will use it in interesting ways where he'll have almost like recurring lines for characters when they're obsessing about a thought. And that can be really useful. Tyrion has like one song he's constantly thinking about in the later books when he's really drunk. There's a couple of others. Jon Snow has the "You know nothing, Jon Snow" refrain. There's a couple of others like that, but I find it it's a very useful technique, I think, especially when you're trying to get into the mind of a character. He died weeping, and in this case, it's not something really obvious. A lot of times, what I see when writing is people will write the thing for the character that's like the first step of a thought, but a lot of times, what you should do is write the second step of the thought, because people can infer what the first step is, because humans actually are very good at interacting with other humans, and they've had thousands and thousands of conversations that started on the second step with other people, so they can just kind of infer it. But you do kind of have to be careful about what the reader's inferring or not, and that's where like a beta reader would come in. He taught me much more, and the last thing I learned was him to taste the flesh. That was the wolf, though. He had never eaten of the meat of men with human teeth. This is funny because that was the wolf, though. Is that this is a thing that bad people do, and I mean all of us do this, where we try to justify actions by saying like, oh, it wasn't really us. Like, it wasn't really me, though. That was the wolf, even though clearly he was controlling the wolf. And he just up here tried to justify it in a different way. I like that psychology. It's really funny. It gives you a sense immediately of who Varamyr is. I mean, this is a good thing to point out. All of this is giving a really clear idea of who Varamyr is, what his thought process is like, and like how he's not a great guy. He would not grudge his pack their feast, however. The wolves were as famished as he was, gaunt and cold and hungry, and the prey, 2 men and a woman, a babe in arms, fleeing from defeat to death. They would have perished soon in any case from exposure or starvation. This way was better, quicker, a mercy. Yeah, justifying killing people. This is a thing people do. So we've had 2 justifications. He was weak. That's why you can kill somebody. It wasn't me. It was a wolf that I was controlling. Also a thing. And then another one, another justification for killing people. It was a mercy. They were going to die anyway. Like, in 2 paragraphs, we've hit like 3 really shitty things. Really shitty reasons for creating bad things. A mercy, he said aloud. His throat was raw, but it felt good to hear a human voice, even his own. The air smelled of mold and damp. The ground was cold and hard, and his fire was giving off more smoke than heat. He moved as close to the flames as he dared, coughing and shivering by turns, his side throbbing where his wound had opened. Blood had soaked his breeches to the knee and dried into a hard brown crust. All of this is description, but it's description A. It's helped because he's doing something in the second half, so it doesn't feel like we're just sitting and talking about it. He's literally moving and talking about it. We have smelled of mold and damp. Those are both good descriptions. The ground was cold and hard. By the way, you may notice this thing where Martin tends to pair up or even triple up adjectives, cold and hard, and then when he wants to emphasize something, he'll do cold and hard and sexy. Cold and hard and sexy, right? And this is the thing I do in my writing. I just picked it up, and it's maybe not the best technique, but it helps give emphasis sometimes. His fire was giving off more smoke than heat. This is something you've had a fire. It's not just the fire was going low. This is a thing that fires actually do, which is good to know. Or it's a good detail to ground you in the world. A lot of times you want to kind of let readers know in small ways. You don't want to lecture things specific to that world that make you go, oh, wow, I didn't realize that that's what this is like. It expands your knowledge a little bit, and by expanding it, it gets you in the mindset of the world and the characters and brings you into it. Again, we have smell, we have feel. The ground was cold and hard and sexy, as I said. Thistle had warned him that might happen. I sewed it up the best I could, she said, but you need to rest and let it mend, or the flesh will tear open again. Again, here we're not saying Thistle was the wildling woman who had saved him. We're just opening with her doing a second order thing. And then we go back to Thistle had been the last of his companions, a spear wife tough as an old root, warty, windburnt, and wrinkled. Old root. This is just a good description. I like it. All right, Melody. You're keeping me honest. I like it. The others had deserted them long ago. One by one, they fell ahead behind or forged ahead, making for their old villages on their Milkwater or Heart home, a lonely death in the woods. Varamyr did not know and could not care. I should have taken one of them when I had the chance. One of the twins, or the big man with the scarred face, or the youth with the red hair. He had been afraid, though. One of the others might have realized that was happening. Then they would have turned on him and killed him. And Haggan's words had haunted him, and so the chance had passed. Okay, so we're going to get Varamyr, not a good dude. He didn't do this because it would be bad for him, not because it was a bad thing. And also he does understand the norm, and he doesn't really want to be thought of as a bad guy, or there's still a part of it in him, which I like. It gives a little bit of dimensionality to someone who's otherwise just not a good person at all. Also, one of the twins, or the big man with the scarred face, or the youth with the red hair. This is what I mean by little details can go a long way, like I mentioned earlier. He's not like giving a big description about the person. These are small, punchy descriptions that help you make like feel like the world is real. It wouldn't have been good of I should have taken one of our companions when I had the chance. That doesn't really tell you. This gives you a visual, and you go, okay, this is a specific thing. You can name the things in the room. After the battle, there have been thousands of them struggling through the forest, hungry, frightened, fleeing the carnage that had descended on them at the wall. So what this is doing, this whole paragraph is, it's recapping what happened at the end of the last book, but it's also tied into what he's doing here. He's not just sitting in a castle thinking about what happened. This is directly relevant to what's going on with him. Also, we're doing a thing that Martin loves to do. And I think it comes from, and it's one of the reasons the books kind of work despite forgetting about characters for long periods. We have an action up here. We're setting the scene of him in the Thistle, not the Thistle, in the cottage, right? And then we're having him think about everything that happened before. And this is how Martin gets away with, and the punchy details are how Martin gets away with making it not seem abstract or like very floaty in describing a montage, which some of the books we've had trouble with. Song of Achilles, which video just released for, had that problem a lot, where it would just montage things that should be described, and it felt very floaty. But here it doesn't feel floaty because it's someone remembering it. And again, punchy details that are specific. So this recaps what had happened for other people. For people, this is the prologue, so it recaps people. I'm going to kind of skip through this because there are certain things I like and other ones that are just kind of like, it's going to take me a long time to read. Thistle is saying that Tormund, the Weeper, Sixskin, and all them brave raiders, where are they now? That's the leadership group. She does not know me, Varamyr realized, and then why would she? Without this beast, he did not look like a great man. I was Varamyr Sixskins, who broke bread with Mance Raider. He had named himself Varamyr when he was 10, a name fit for a lord, a name for songs, a mighty name, fearsome. Yet he had run from the crows like a frightened rabbit. The terrible Lord Varamyr had gone craven, but he could not bear that she should know that, so he told the Spearknife that his name was Haggan. Afterwards, he wondered why the name had come to his lips, of all those that he might have chosen. I ate his heart and drank his blood, and still he haunts me. Martin really loves to do, like, kind of haunting things that keep going with characters throughout the whole thing. I really like that. It's just a thing I really like, and he's good at it. The other thing is we're setting up that Varamyr is a guy who, without his animals, he's nothing. So again, a little bit of depth to the character. And by depth, I don't mean like, oh, who's right or who's wrong. I mean literally depth. Like there is more to this character than just the surface level, because a lot of times that gets used to mean like gray storytelling or something like that. And no, Varamyr is not a good dude. Also, we get that, you know, he doesn't like that he's nobody without his animals, which, you know, again, detail. What I do like here is she says a thing, and then he says he thinks a thing that's related, but again, doesn't exactly follow on. And that's the thing Martin does very well, is he mirrors how people think in a way that I really like, and I think helps the whole work flow. This is all stuff that's interesting, but not necessarily important to talk about now. This just has to do with the plot of the books. And mostly here, I'm talking about like writing craft. Oh, okay. We get the idea here that there's a thing called a true death, which is when the human part dies, he can slip into an animal for his second life, as they call it, or second death. I just like this description. The back of his head smashed into red pulp, flecked with bits of bone. I think I actually used that in my writing. Oh, interesting. I mean, it's not super creative, so I mean, it's not super original, so it's not like I think I stole it or anything. But red pulp flecked with bits of bone. I think I used one similar. Limbrick says there's also inference that Varamyr was deeply impacted by his parents' coldness, hence he needs to be with someone. Oh yeah, that's true. We're gonna get to that. The knights had come, invincible in their steel, killing everyone who stayed to fight. It was run or die. Death was not so easily outrun, however. Me and Katie talked about this in my writing part because I really like how Martin does this, and I've talked about it here. It was like, it's almost like a little bit clever. You know who does this a lot is Terry Pratchett. Terry Pratchett does that a lot, where the prose themselves are like a character. Even if I didn't love Guards, he does that quite a lot. This is a more subtle, less funny version of it, in that he's talking about a topic that he just talked about here. Death was not so easily outrun, however. Haggan's voice echoed in his head. You will die a dozen deaths, boy, and everyone will hurt, but when your true death comes, you will live again. The second life is simpler and sweeter, they say. Varamyr would know the truth of that soon enough. Okay, so what he's doing here is Martin's trying to give you information that you're going to need for the end of the chapter about the true death versus the second death. And again, this is a very nice transition from what was said there to what it's here. Again, in our writing thing, Katie said that it was masculine writing to do that, and that like it was like vagina writing not to do that. I don't know. She would have to be here to defend herself. Smoke that acrid hung in the air. Again, acrid smoke is not super creative, but it works. That's one of the things Martin does. is that he has really solid descriptions that are not the most creative, but punch really hard and give you a sense of the world. And then every once in a while, he can write much better. Or he can kind of scale up to a more poetic or intelligent prose. Not always, but sometimes he does. Varamyr had died 9 times before. He had died from a spear thrust, once with a bear's teeth in his throat, and once in a wash of blood as he brought forth the stillborn cub. Wash of blood is very nice there. But again, we have specifics. And obviously, this is a thing I stole from my writing as well. Martin almost always does this in 3s. A spear thrust, bear's teeth in his mouth, and a wash of blood. And you always put the longer one at the end. It's just the rule of 3s. More than 3, and it's hard to keep track of them. Though there is one chapter where he's talking about all the heraldry one place has, and it's a paragraph of just one after the other. But in that case, he's doing a specific thing. And because Martin keeps it simple and specific, those punchy, beautiful beats really hit extra hard. Yeah, exactly. So actually, one of the things, we talked about this a minute ago up here, you weren't here, Limburg, but the breath of the pack puffed warm and white from long gray jaws. That is a pretty sentence, but it's not totally, it's a little bit muddy and it's a little hard to picture. And that's why sometimes you don't want to do, not really purpley, but more complicated prose, because it's hard to keep track of it. And especially if you're giving a list of things, if each of these, he would die from spear thrust, bear's teeth, and wash of blood, if those were longer, it would actually be harder to picture them because you're trying to keep the whole thing in your head at once. And so by the end of these 3, you can keep track of all 3 of them. But if this paragraph, instead of being like this long, if it was like this long, Maria would enjoy it more. Hey-o. But also, I'm sorry guys, I'm such a menace without the girls here. I'm also on caffeine, which is so I'm kind of hyped. But it would be harder to keep in your head all at once. And so you wouldn't really be able to understand it. It wouldn't be a singular piece. It would just be kind of treacly. He had died his first death when he was only 6 as his father's axe crashed through his skull. Very good. Because this is like, oh shit, what? He just drops that in there, first of all. But second of all, it creates like a certain amount of tension and mystery of like, why did his dad kill him? That's bizarre. Even that had not been so agony as the fire in his guts crackling. He got killed in the last book by somebody burning him out of an eagle, which was pretty dope. That was when he noticed the fire had gone out. Okay, so he was just talking about fire here, and now we're talking about fire here. Again, we have a certain amount of, like, the transition is really nice. And also, we're now going back for the first time to the forward action of the chapter. Again, Martin's really kind of good at sneaking those kinds of things in when he needs to. He doesn't do this every chapter. If he did this every chapter, it would be incredibly annoying. But he does do it enough that I've noticed it. And it's a way of recapping what happened because it might have been like 200 pages since you last read about this character. He's talking here about how he should have taken Thistle, the woman that helped him, in her brain. Oh, yeah, this is another thing Martin does. She went to leave food and he stayed there. So like a fool, he'd waited, dreaming of Haggan and Bump and all the wrongs he had done in his long life. But days and nights had passed and Thistle had not returned. What he's doing here is 2 specifics, Haggan and Bump, and then an abstract and all the wrongs he'd done in his life. The reason it's okay that this is abstract here is because he does give so many specifics at other times that it's okay when he abstracts it every once in a while. Like, so normally you would think one of my critiques would be, state a couple of his wrongs in a short, punchy way, like I've been saying he's doing here. But because he's had so many punchy descriptions, it's okay he does an abstract here. And also, again, 2 specifics and then an abstract also help because it's kind of makes you think and go, oh, wow, like a little bit. At least I feel that way. I don't know how coherent I'm being. We're back to Haggan thinking about Abomination. Again, because he doesn't really say that he's obsessed with Haggan, but like you can tell because he keeps returning to the thought process as the chapter goes on. Limburg says, I can't believe I missed part of the Martin stream. The only prologue I think is more impactful than this is from A Storm Swords when they blow the horns. Oh, God, yeah. That one's a good one when the whites are coming. Also, A Clash of Kings has the really, really good one with the Maester, but that one to me was even more info dumpy, so I kind of thought that would bore people a little bit. But yeah, his prologues are always good because Martin is a short story writer at his heart, and he's a horror short story writer. And so when he has to do something atmospheric, he's really good at it. And I think what really helps is that a lot of the characters in these prologues are bad. I mean, they all die by the end of the chapter, which is the funny part, but a lot of times they're sort of slightly pathetic people. In the first... not so much in Game of Thrones, though the viewpoint of it is he's like just a normal dude. In the second one, in A Clash of Kings, it's just an old man who's past his prime, and everyone kind of thinks of him as being like a little bit pathetic and silly, but he still has kind of like some intelligence there, which is like helps add the kind of to the atmosphere. That was one of the things I said about the Southern Reach trilogy, which is that horror only really works if you're in the character's mindset of why they think it's like scary or pathetic, and you want to give that sense of lack of control to the characters. Saga says, I need to work on reading A Song of Ice and Fire again. I mean, it's long. It's really long. So, like, I don't really blame anyone who doesn't read it or just doesn't have the time. Limburg says, Martin knows how to write dramatic scenes without narrative lyrics, relying too hard on the visuals, in my opinion. Yeah, he's good at that. He's good at using like simple language to tell a really good story. I want to get to the end of this chapter, but I'm not sure. His own mother had abandoned him as well. She cried for Bump, but she never cried for me. The morning his father pulled him out of bed to deliver him to Haggan, she would not even look at him. You belong with your own kind is all she said when he flung him down on Haggan's feet. So basically, I'm gonna, because it's kind of important towards the end of the chapter, which I want to get to, but also it's gonna take a while to read that. Haggan, he was Bump. No. His brother was Bump and he was Lump, I think, and he went into his brother's brain and tried to control him, because the thing is that wargs and skin changers, I think they're called, can go and control an animal's mind. Not all animals. Some animals are much harder, like cats don't like it. Wolves and dogs are like much easier, but you're not supposed to do it to a human. That's an abomination, I think, as we read about a second ago. And it's also very difficult to do. This is all actually also important because one of the characters, Bran, is also doing this, and there's he's beginning to control Hodor, who is like in the books they call him Simple, I think. So the book doesn't tell you in Bran's point of view that this is like a bad thing, but from this chapter you're like, oh, it's not good he's doing this. Martin knows this is kind of fucked up. Anyway, Varamyr went into his brother's mind, and then his father killed him, and that's where he killed him there, and then he sent him off to the skin changer. When I am grown I would come king beyond the wall, Lump had promised himself. He never had, but he had come close. Varamyr Six Skins was a name and men feared. He rode to battle on the back of a snow bear 13 feet tall, kept 3 wolves and a shadow cat in his thrall, and sat at the right hand of Mance Raider. It was Mance who brought me to this place. I should not have listened. I should have slipped inside my bear and torn him to pieces. This is all really good description of his character. You get an idea of who he is. We know what drives him, and it's not like a tragic backstory that we're meant to sympathize. Well, we're supposed to sympathize to a certain extent, but it's not supposed to excuse his actions. In the way that a lot of like gray in quotation mark characters are. And then also he's kind of petty. It was Mance who brought me to this place. I should not have listened. I should have slipped inside my bear and torn him to pieces. It's not obvious, but it's telling you about his mind state. I'm going to skip through because again, I think I'm mostly going to be repeating myself about how he's characterizing him. Melody says, you talked about freedom units earlier and look at that. They measured height and feet. Yeah, that's a good point. We're back to America. Dogs were the easiest beasts to bond with. They lived so close to men that they were almost human. Slipping into a dog's skin was like putting on an old boot. Its leather softened by wear. Let's just look at description that tells you. It gives you a visual to help explain an abstract idea. And because up here he's talking about his wolves. So, and then he talks about like different kind, like what wolves are like. And then over here he talks about cats were vain and cruel, always ready to turn on you. Elk and deer were prey, wear their skins too long, and even the bravest man became a coward. Bears, boars, badgers, weasels. Haggan did not hold with such skins you never want to wear them, boy. You won't like what you become. Birds were the worst, to hear him tell it. So this is all what we would consider info dumping, but the way that Martin sneaks it in is that he's thinking about what his second life is going to be like, and so this is relevant to him. Exposition doesn't have to be like life or death, but it does have to be relevant to what the character is thinking about. You always want exposition to serve two purposes, not just to explain the world to the reader, but also to characterize the character. And that's what he's doing here. Varamyr couldn't take any beast he wanted, bend them to his will, make their flesh his own, dog or wolf, bear or badger. Thistle, he thought. Haggan would call it an abomination, the blackest sin of all, but Haggan was dead, devoured, and burned. So here, again, we get you can kind of triangulate the idea here. He's thinking about which animal he wants to be in death, and then he's like, okay, the woman, and then he doesn't say at any point here, he's not explicitly thinking to himself, I'm going to take Thistle and live my second life in her, but we can interpret it. Good transition here, but not actually using it. You just have two thoughts in contrast to each other. There's a thing called the Kuleshov effect, which is that in a mental phenomenon by which viewers derive more meaning from the interaction of two sequential shots than from a single shot in isolation. So again, you get information if you just have a scene of a woman and her baby crying, that's one thing. And then if you put in the middle, though, a man grinning, that's suddenly very creepy and weird. And so that's kind of what Martin does here. We're not told. It's literally, it's not like a fade in or a fade out. If you're thinking this as a movie where one fades in and the other fades out, it's 2 shots. But the cutting between them gives you information. Limber says, I think it's also interesting that it's now in his extremity that he surrenders the idea of human possession. Yeah, Varamyr is still not doing good. I don't know how he keeps thinking. Like, this is one of my problems, is that I run out of things for characters to do. I'm just like, they just do like the same 3 things. But here he's had like, this is like, what, the 4th time we've described him just being in the hut, not doing well. He scooped up a fistful of snow and filled his mouth with it, rubbing it through his beard and against his cracked lips, sucking down the moisture. Just, again, you in a book, you need so many details. It's like amazing. Oh, okay. And then also here, we have Martin doing his 3 rule again. But Haggan was dead, devoured, and burned. Dead, devoured, burned. It's okay that they're abstract in this case because, again, he's specific elsewhere. And also 3 abstracts kind of give you something that's close to a specific. Just more thinking about death and what that's going to be like. This is all like nice, but I want to get to the end. Oh, okay. And so then he wakes up from his dream and there's a bunch of whites there, which are like undead. Varamyr woke suddenly, violently, his whole body shaking. Get up, a voice was screaming, get up, we have to go. There are hundreds of them. The snow had covered him with a stiff white blanket, so cold. When he tried to move, he found that his hands were frozen to the ground. He left some skin behind when he tore it loose. Okay, so one of the cool things, and I talked about this before, the so cold, that gets you into his mindset, even though, like, we already know it from this, but he's thinking it. I think this is actually supposed to be italicized, which keeps up the italices that was going before. When he tried to move, he found that his hands was frozen to the ground. This is, again, a thing where they do an action, and then you get information that flows from that action, that stops that action. That happened earlier with the woman and the baby. He left some skin behind when he tore it loose. This is, information, but again, you can infer what happened between the 2 shots. And I think that's just a thing Martin does pretty well. Thistle had returned to him. She had him by the shoulders and was shaking him, shouting in his face. Varamyr could smell her breath and feel the warmth of it upon cheeks gone numb with cold. Now he thought, do it now or die. What's also funny about this is that, like, you get a sense for, like, Thistle is a really good person, and, like, Varamyr is not. Like, that's makes Varamyr like a much worse person, is that he's doing this to someone who clearly is trying to help him, even when it's kind of hopeless, but she's still trying to help him. He summoned all the strength still in him, leapt out of his own skin, and forced himself inside her. Thistle arched her back and screamed. Good visual, and again, we're pushing out. It's funny. Being distant from the characters can be bad or it can be good, and it has to do with how close you've been to the characters before this, and how much it helps emphasize sometimes moments. Abomination, was that him or her or Haggan? I like this. I really like this. Okay, so it's showing that he's lost, but also it's him or her is the expected one, but Haggan, like, the past is still with him, and that haunting of what Haggan said to him that he's thinking about so much now in death is still with him. And again, we have the rule of 3s: her, him, or Haggan. And it's kind of clever. I don't quite know how to describe it, but Martin does that a lot. He does things where the language is a little bit clever and operates in a way where the prose, like, okay, so him, her, or Haggan, we really couldn't do on screen. You could in terms of like flashing, like her, him, Haggan, but like in terms of if you were just looking at the scene, this is a thing only prose can do or not only, but prose can do is connect Haggan with the other, with what's happening in the scene. It can kind of meld space and time through the prose. I don't know if I'm making sense. I've had too much caffeine. His old flesh, I just like that. That's a good description. Fell back into the snowdrift as his fingers loosened. The spear wife twisted, violently shrieking. His shadow used to fight him wildly, and the snow bear had gone half mad for a time, snapping at trees and rocks in empty air, but this was worse. Get out, he heard her mouth shouting. That's actually very good filtering. You're not usually supposed to filter, but in this case, that's the point. Her body staggered, fell, and rose again. Her hands flailed, her legs jerking this way and that in some grotesque dance as his spirit and her own fought for the flesh. Good descriptions. I would not have put grotesque dance here. It feels a little bit telly to me, because I don't know. I think this just staggered and rose again. Her hands flailed, her legs jerking this way and that. Grotesque dance to me just doesn't feel raw enough for what's going on in the scene. But I mean, that's a very minor scene. This scene reads kind of grapey, and it really helps making it shocking and comfortable to read. Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, right up here he said, and forced himself inside her. That's literally what it's supposed to be somewhat analogous to. She sucked down a mouthful of the frigid air, and Varamyr had half a heartbeat to glory in the taste of it and the strength of this young body before her teeth snapped together and filled his mouth with blood. Again, not saying that she bit her teeth, but inferring it. She raised her hands to his face. He tried to push them down again, but the hands would not obey, and she was clawing at his eyes. Here we have it switching to his, right? That's very nice. It's just a small thing. but it gives you a sense of that he is now in control. Again, it doesn't really say that he's in control. We just have heartbeat of glory and the taste of it. So it's not he had a heartbeat of glory in taking control or being in control. It's heartbeat of glory, and we know what he was thinking before this, wanting it to be, and then the taste of it is a physical thing. Limburg says, saying something is grotesque is the author inserting themselves into the visual. Yeah, true. Actually, very, very good point. It is telling, and that takes away from what he wants to achieve. Abomination, he remembered drowning in blood and pain and madness. Again, we have the rule of threes, blood and pain and madness. For some reason, again, he gets away with it being abstract when he does that. I don't quite know why. When he tried to scream, she spat their tongue out. Again, we have the thing that he does. I'm just going to keep saying these things over and over again. He tried to do a thing, then some flat information. But you can infer what happened between them, and it's more powerful because you have that Kuleshov effect going on. This is reminiscent of Catelyn's death scene as well, a treat for the reader who remembers. Yeah, that's true, actually. That death scene is really good because you can get a sense for her mind just fracturing from like the grief and pain of what's going on. The white world turned and fell away for a moment as if he were inside the weirwood, gazing at him through carved red eyes as a dying man twitched feebly on the ground and a mad woman danced blind and bloody underneath the moon. This is better. Mad woman danced blind and bloody beneath the moon. Not grotesque. So yeah, no, Limburg's totally right there. It's the problem with that was it was grotesque because it's like, okay, we got it. Weeping red tears and ripping at her clothes. Notice weeping red tears, not a description of vaginas here. An appropriate description of where things should be weeping with tears. Then we're both in gun and he was rising. He was a sparrow, a squirrel, an oak. A horn flew nearby. Varamyr was inside the owl, inside the hare, inside the tree. Deep below the frozen ground, earthworms bared blindly in the dark, and he was one of them as well. I am the wood and everything that's in it, he thought, exulting. 100 ravens. Here he does need to state that he's exulting, because otherwise you wouldn't know. This thought, I am the wood and everything that's in it, he thought, I would think is kind of like a comforting thought, or almost like an at peace thought, whereas exulting tells you what it is. Again, you can get away with being abstract sometimes if you've been specific otherwise. I guess it's kind of like a formula. Like you want to keep it like 70-30 or something like that. Before their hearts could, a sleeping direwolf raised his head to snarl at empty air. Before the heart could beat again, he had passed on, searching for his own, for One Eye, Sly, and Stalker, for his pack. His wolves would save him, he told himself. That was his last thought as a man. Such a good line. And again, something only really prose can do. You can't really do that with like film. You could try to kind of do something like that. But, and also, this is telling, I know, but it's such a good telling. It's such a wham line. True death came suddenly. He felt a shock of cold as if he had been plunged into the icy waters of frozen lakes. Then he found himself rushing over moonlit snows with his packmates close behind him. Half the world was dark. One Eye he knew. He bayed, and Sly and Stalker gave echo. Gave echo is a little bit... I get what he's saying on the whole, it gives the books an old-timey feel, which is good. But like right here, like I can see what he's doing. But maybe I'm the only one. I'm like, my reaction is basically like, oh, I see what you did there. You used an archaic way of saying the thing. And it's noticeable to me, so it breaks me out of the world a little bit. But I don't think to most readers they would even catch it. Okay, and now we get to the end, which is so good. When they reached the crest, the wolves paused. Thistle, he remembered, and a part of him grieved what he had lost, and another part for what he'd done. Below, the world turned to ice. Fingers of frost crept slowly up the weirwood, reaching out for each other. Fingers of frost, not super creative, but reaching for each other. That's a nice spin on it. That gives a nice visual. The empty village was no longer empty. Blue-eyed shadows walked amongst the mounds of snow. Some wore brown and some wore black and some wore naked, their flesh gone white as snow. Brown, black, and naked. Again, threes here. And also, again, he's just kind of stating information, but the way he's stating it gives you an effect. Sorry, my brain is beginning to fry a little bit. And also there is, this is almost like a camera moving through from far away down into the village itself to a closer shot. A wind was sighing through the hills, heavy with their scents, dead flesh, dry blood, skins that stank of mold and rotten urine. Mold and rotten urine. Dead flesh, dry blood, skins. I'm telling you, Martin does this a lot, and it's a thing that I steal in my own writing. But again, also we're back in the wolf point of view, so these are the things they notice. Sly gave a growl and bared her teeth, her ruff bristling. Not men, not prey, not these. Nice wham line. You could probably, I think, make this its own paragraph if you wanted, but he wants to save that, I think, to make up this wham line here. Because if you do this every time, then all of a sudden it stops having impact. The things below moved, but did not live. One by one, they raised their heads toward the 3 wolves on the hill. The last to look was the thing that had been Thistle. She wore wool and fur and leather, and over that she wore a coat of hoarfrost that crackled when she moved and glistened in the moonlight. Pale pink icicles hung from her fingertips, 10 long knives of frozen blood. And in the pits where her eyes had been, a pale blue light was flickering, lending her coarse features an eerie beauty they had never known in life. She sees me. Oh, such a great line to end with. Because up until this point, you're like, oh, he's safe, but no, he's not. She sees him. That's the thing that usually, people can't do, and it gives the world. This is also just a good description of her. Like, it's nicely creepy. I especially like 10 long knives of frozen blood. Again, it's not super fancy, but it's really effective at giving you an image. And in the pits where her eyes had been, a pale blue light was flickering, lending her coarse features an eerie beauty they had never known in life. Here, this is not a thing a wolf would think, but I think it's to complete the image. It's worth sacrificing a little bit of that viewpoint. And to be honest, I didn't even notice it because it's so creepy when I was going through it at first. And also, it ends ambiguously. He might not actually die, but you get the sense that, like, yeah, he gone, he dead. Yeah, I think that's it. I really, this is like one of my. I remember when I first read this, and I was in college, and it was so creepy. He's again just very good at doing these atmospheric horror type things. That was the first chapter, the prologue to A Dance of Dragons. We finally did it. It took a year and a half, but on this channel, we looked at part of A Song of Ice and Fire. Pale pink icicles are a wonderful visual. Yeah, because they're not, like, if they were blood red or if they were white, it wouldn't work, but it's the pale pink. I guess Katie and Maria were hindering the Martin examination. Rude. I literally started, I don't know, back when I met Maria, so like 9 years ago, I started a channel where I was just going to talk about Martin's writing and the things I liked and didn't like in it. And I got like 2 videos in and then just nobody watched the channel, so I stopped making it. But I think he does a lot of things that are really effective in his writing. They're simple, but they're ones you can pick up. So again, like rule of threes, that's pretty easy. Small, simple details that are immediately visualizable. Easy thing. This, what we're doing here, I actually should be doing a lot more because I want to improve my writing a lot. My biggest problem, honestly, are similes and mannerisms. I just constantly reuse them, and it's a problem. But if you're having trouble with your writing, honestly, I would do this. Don't read the book and assume that you're thinking about it as you're going. You're not. It's in a creative part of your head. Put it onto paper and actually type out the things you're thinking, no matter how dumb it may seem, like nice verb or nice simile, because it'll bounce it to the more analytical part of your brain and you're more likely to remember it. It's funny. When I was young, we would play a game among my family. We had game nights, and one of them was a game called Crack the Case, where it's like one card would have it would set up a scenario and it would ask you, like, okay, who did it? Who killed this person? And the person who was like the GM essentially would read the backstory on the other side of the card and would answer questions from the people. And what's funny is that we got to a point where we actually couldn't replay any of the cards because we had actively learned each case, like step by step. And so we would just remember it very quickly. Like within a couple of like sentences, we were like, oh, that's what happened there. That's how that got fixed. And I think that's something where that's how people learn. Like our education system today is basically like there's a factory line of kids. You open their head, you pour in the information, you close it again, and they're just supposed to remember that information. And that's not how learning works. This is one of the reasons video games, I wrote a whole paper about this, are actually significantly better at teaching than actual classrooms, because a video game teaches you a system or a process. And because you are actively learning and puzzling it out, you remember it much better. When you're thinking about trying to learn writing, I think that's the way to do it, is not just to passively read it and listen to it, but to actively think about it. I've learned so much, honestly, from talking to Katie and Maria, because they just bounce different ideas around. Doing this actually helps a lot, and I mark it up, and I've looked at past ones I've done, and so that really helps. My son is autistic, and video games have helped him so much. He learns a lot faster with them than with standard methods. Yes, and what's interesting is that I don't know about him, but in terms of like math games, because I played a game called Math Blaster when I was young, that was like an educational game. That was just a normal game, but like sometimes you would have to move the astronaut into the correct equation. so he finished the whatever. And that's not how, like, that's just tacking on learning onto a normal game. What would be better is if you explored a system like a Kerbal Space Program. It's actually really good about teaching people how to, about space, the, I don't know, astronaut program or whatever it's called, because you actually learn through trial and error, like, oh, you need a rocket here, or you need a fin there, or this is how aerodynamics work. I enjoyed what little I caught immensely. I'd love to look at Martin's old worse writing, says Lindbergh. Yeah, I kind of want to do the first Catelyn chapter, because I remember when I was rereading it at one point, and I remember when I was rereading it, my brain just kind of like, this is too much. Like, I even know the context for all the royal names she's saying, and I was like, this is too much. If you are interested in Martin chapters, I think it's Race for the Iron Throne. There's a reread chapter by chapter where he doesn't do so much writing craft as does analysis of the series. But yeah, he's going one by one through all of the chapters. It is Race for the Iron Throne. Yeah, it's Race for the Iron Throne. He's really smart. Like, that's one of the reasons I don't really want to go chapter through these, because I just don't think I'd be able to measure up to him. So check that out if you want to see more of the actual like plot type things. And yeah, again, thank you all for joining us. I don't have Maria or Katie to sign us out, so bye.